Hello and welcome to Section 9 material for our class Political Science 222, War and Politics on Film. This is video 9.1, the first of two videos or instructional lectures provided for you tonight to set the material and context for our film viewing focused on the theme of extremism in defense of liberty. I have a couple of brief announcements and class business items that I want to cover, and then we'll get into a lecture that I'll PowerPoint format and discuss through for the next 10 or 15 minutes. First and foremost, I want to welcome you back, and I hope that you and your families are doing well. These are surprising and a little bit chaotic times, but I hope you'll agree with me that I found it kind of grounding to get back into my regular routine to do what I love, and that is teaching and engaging with students on interesting topics related to international relations. My family is doing well. We're here all in the same house. My daughter is in 8th grade at high school, but she is learning from home. My son, is a first year at Kenyon College. He is also taking classes online, even today, for example. So we're all getting into this new mode. By the way, I put the backdrop up of beautiful Hawaii to remind us of the conference that I was going to attend, the International Studies Association convention that is set in Honolulu, Hawaii. That conference was canceled for this year. And instead, what we'll do is we'll focus on class material, and I'll get this funny background moved off fairly soon. I do want to repeat a couple of messages first from my welcome back video that I think that many of you have already seen that helps to set the tone for what we're going to be doing moving forward. I hope overall that you have found this to be a manageable transition, even though it's surprising and unexpected. And I hope that you've also found everyone at the College of Worcester to be supportive and engaging, encouraging, working with you to try to support this difficult and surprising set of changes. In terms of class business, I want to remind you that what we're doing then is engaging in a series of recorded lectures that set the tone for key class themes and discussion, and then that give you additional instruction accompanying the syllabus to make sure that you know our plan in a revised structure and format. I'm going to shift now to a presentation of the PowerPoint slides that'll give you that overview. So you should now see the PowerPoint slide as the centerpiece of the screen, and I'm probably in a small box off to the right. Just to reiterate from the welcome back video that there is important information contained in the revamped syllabus, and that you have a sense already of how we're going to conduct class moving forward. Tonight's lecture series, these two videos, are posted on Tuesday night, March 31st at 7 p.m. and available for you to view. They also include within them some instructions for taking a look at associated videos and video clips, as well as setting you up for the feature film viewing that you're going to see this evening or in the next few days. Remember that the video lecture content and the filmic material that you're reviewing, as well as the readings for each week, are assigned and testable material for the class moving forward. In relation to the syllabus, you know that we are in Section 9 material. Section 9 is focused on extremism in defense of liberty, ? And provides an overview of key themes we'll talk about more in just a few minutes. The required readings for this section, Section 9, are Cynthia Combs' Criminals or Crusaders, and the Can Terrorism Ever Be Justified? Hondrich and Meisel's Debate. And I'll reference those in a couple of minutes as well. You also know that a deleted reading, no longer required reading, is the Corrigan chapter on researching the movies, given the circumstances. It's great reading, though, and so if you have a chance to take a look at it, please do. It'll further inform and enrich your approach to understanding films and political themes in this class. So we're getting into our new pattern, right? We're going to have these video lectures, then we're going to assign some film viewing on your own, and often some writing assignments or projects that flow from that. Reminder looking forward that Section 10 material next Tuesday, April 7th, will focus on war photography, which is a really interesting chance for us to think critically about war imagery, in this case, still imagery, using some of the same tools that we've used and developed for our critical film analysis throughout the course of the semester. Before I go further, though, I also want to say congratulations to our seniors. Many of you seniors in this class have completed your senior IS and turned it in. This probably isn't the traditional spring celebration that you expected, but we wanted to acknowledge the good work that you've done. And if you're not a senior, I'm sure you have many friends who are celebrating and very happy about that accomplishment. We're now beginning then to plan and conduct video conference online IS oral defense meetings. And that is coming together very, very well. So a substantive introduction for this evening. We're going to be talking about key themes related to extremism and defense of liberty. So this is the first PowerPoint slide that you might have seen if we were having an in-person or traditional class. And you know that that first slide often gives you an overview of the key themes that we're going to develop in class and discuss along the way. A simple outline tonight. We're going to reflect on some themes raised by the Combs and Meisels and Hondrich debate on the question of whether or not we could ever imagine a strategic logic to terrorism. And then in the second video for tonight, video 9.2, I'll provide a quick overview and some historical background on the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, setting up for your feature film viewing, Paradise Now. This is the first then of a series of PowerPoint slides for our lecture or video conference presentation. I'll also mention that I'll be going through these fairly steadily, a bit quickly, in these videos, because I want to keep the videos as short and sharp and focused as they can be. That said, you can always press pause or even go back and review key sections to make sure you get the material written down that you find relevant and interesting. This question of extremism and defense of liberty is a really interesting one that has us mindful of broader and deeper questions in this class about the use of force. This important theme, how far might one go for a cause, serves as a kind of touchstone for the kinds of issues that we're talking about tonight and watching in our films. You'll also see that this theme, how far might one go for a cause, relates very well to other issues we've developed in class so far, like our discussions of nationalism and war, extending from themes built up in the Hedges book, to questions about the legitimacy of the use of force, questions we've addressed on war and meaning, war and remembrance, and more recently on struggles for self-determination. There's so many themes then that are connected to this central issue we'll investigate for this evening: war and meaning, nationalism, legitimacy, and self-determination, raising important questions about when, if ever, we can imagine that it might be legitimate to use force, or even legitimate to take up insurgency actions, or even a strategic logic to terrorism. These themes and questions will drive us through in our investigation. You know, there's so many examples of this that come to mind for me offhand, and they're examples that we've developed and discussed in some of our films and references already this semester in class. Historically, for example, we can imagine almost any struggle against colonialism or a struggle for independence and self-determination as being more broadly, of a challenge to existing authority. Insurgency and extremism against existing authority, challenging the status quo in colonial struggles for independence by citizens in those countries that sought to throw off the yoke of colonial oppression. Examples from around the world like Sri Lanka, where you had a group of Tamils, an ethnic group in Sri Lanka, who challenged the Sinhalese majority that seemed to control the government and levers of power for years and years. The Tamil Tigers became an infamous terrorist group and insurgency movement that were challenging the legitimate authority of the government of Sri Lanka. Or more contemporary struggles where we see extremist groups take up arms against what they perceive as oppression or domination. They perceive subordination and challenge. Examples include, of course, the Islamic terrorist organizations and their challenges against Westernization and their challenges against the United States, from Al-Qaeda and its decades-long struggle against the United States and Western powers, to the Islamic State and its perceived challenges to dominance and authority in the Middle East region and beyond. So many questions then, so many connections that we could make in this class and to classes that you've had at the College of Worcester. This theme of our investigation tonight is extremism in defense or the pursuit of liberty, a vice. You know, I'll mention has historical connections and important IR connections, but it's also just a play on words. It's a play on words from Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater, who ran on the Republican ticket for the US presidency in 1964. Goldwater, a real arch conservative from the desert Southwest, had very strong views about whether or not strength and extremism in the pursuit of particular values was valid, was strategic, or was logical. He famously said, extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation is no virtue. So Goldwater, among many others, have suggested that extremism and a dominance drive against dominant authority are somehow legitimate and valued. This, of course, pushes us into our controversial theme for tonight. Could insurgent violence or terrorism ever be justified or justifiable? This theme comes up again and again in films related to war and politics. Films that we've viewed parts of together, that we've discussed either directly or indirectly, but like many examples on your screen, and so many others I'm sure you could think of. This is such a tough and difficult issue that ideally in our class this would be the segment where we as a group would gather in an in-person class in a live setting and engage in a structured debate on the question. We would have groups divide up and consider key arguments on one side or the other. We would have you review the material from Meisel's and Hondrick's debate, and also to some extent from the Cynthia Combs piece and filmic examples to develop strong arguments either for and against this concept of justification or legitimacy of the use of force. Interesting questions that we could probe more fully in a structured debate setting in a class like ours. And I know that would have been a lively and spirited discussion. But because we're in the setting that we're in, I want to shift gears and connect us more directly to this question in reference to the Cynthia Combs reading and frame it from her perspective and draw on a few of her tools to push the discussion forward. So this question of extremism and the use of terrorist violence, could it ever be considered logical or legitimate? Really tough, head-scratching questions that Cynthia Combs confronts, among others, in her investigation of this theme in detail. I mean, effectively, what we're talking about here, what we would have debated together in class, is whether or not there could ever be a cause or legitimacy that we might imagine for the use of extremist violence. Some of this, of course, is unthinkable to so many of us, yet it is a reality in international security. What would drive an individual to make a decision to participate in a terrorist action? What would drive an individual to decide to participate in an extremist action or a use of military force or violence against others? These questions come up again and again when we look at the reality of the international security environment, where we see the challenges that continue in insurgency struggles by the Taliban, for example, against US forces in Afghanistan, in acts of terrorism and violence that we see periodically in the news headlines. These interesting questions have Combs asking, is there any logic to terrorism? Could we imagine a strategic logic to this question? What kind of person would become a terrorist? In what situations could we imagine there being legitimacy for the use of force or the use of this kind of violence? You know, political scientists are really interested in this question, so I'm glad that we're able to connect to it in a class like this. Political scientists push us to think about the strategic logic issue critically and creatively. That direct question, in what situations could a person become an extremist or a terrorist, is an interesting one in itself. We build out and we talk about whether there's some strategic patterns here or some strategic logic or rationale that we could imagine. And then ultimately for political scientists, we find this interesting because it relates to the question of whether we could predict or theorize about the use of extremist force or violence. This idea of predicting, right? Understanding information, describing patterns, creating hypotheses and testing them, creating predictive theory about the use of force or terrorist violence is intriguing to political scientists and actually has become quite a preoccupation for some, especially in the post 9/11 era. We also know that the idea of understanding the rationale for what could drive people to become criminals or crusaders, what could drive the logic for people who are involved in this kind of extremist violence is a tough area or a tough realm to think about. I'll say again that Cynthia Combs does a really good job in her piece, Criminals and Crusaders, got it to show around here, Criminals and Crusaders, in investigating the contours of these questions. Ultimately, she says, it comes down to whether or not we as political scientists or we as interested individuals view terrorists or people that use extremist violence as, essentially criminals or deviants who are taking irrational actions. They're criminals or deviants. It's something we could never understand or imagine, right? We're taking irrational actions. Or if it's more valuable to see them as crusaders, as individuals or groups who are driven strongly by ideology and by religious fervor, who are deeply committed to their cause to try to achieve key objectives. Cynthia Combs discusses the contours of these issues very well and has us thinking about whether or not it is better, richer, and a more comprehensive explanation to see them in these ways. Ultimately, after reviewing Cynthia Combs' chapter, she comes down on the side that they are crusaders, that it might be best, she argues, for political scientists to understand that these are individuals and groups strongly driven by ideology and religious fervor, that they are deeply committed to their cause, and that there is ultimately a strategic logic to terrorism that Combs wants us to understand. This is consistent with arguments by other terrorist experts like Martha Crenshaw, for example, who's out of Stanford University, who contend, Robert Pape is another example, who contend that there are underlying rationales that are driving individuals and groups to these extremist acts of violence. Many of you know then that in the second half of Combs' article for Science for This Week, she then develops that theme further. She looks at some of the details and tries to understand if we can generalize and characterize terrorists in particular ways. Because we have the advantage of setting this up in an asynchronous nature as a set of video lectures, I now am able to connect this to your assignment between viewing these two instructional videos. I'm going to ask you now to log off this video. I'll be wrapping up in just a minute, and to go to my playlist on the YouTube channel and take a look at a video that I've posted up there. Its title is The Making and Unmaking of an Islamic Terrorist. It's the story of Mubin Sheikh, a self-radicalized jihadist who was turned police informant, who talks about his journey and how he as an individual could ever come to seem to espouse extremist ideology and even consider terrorist violence. It's a really intriguing little video. It's a 10 or 11 minute long video, but it gives you a sense of perspective. It takes us into the mind of someone considering these issues. So because we have the advantage of this asynchronous setup, I'm going to now ask you to wrap up your viewing of this video lecture 9.1 and take a few minutes and watch the attached video. It's on my playlist in the YouTube channel, on my YouTube channel. It is also available on YouTube. If you search by that title, it comes right up. It's easy to access. And I hope you'll find it interesting and engaging. I'm going to stop now, and I'll plan to see you next in video 9.2, which provides an overview of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and sets up for tonight's film. Thanks for your attention.